In today's video, we're diving into Alone in the Dark, an interactive cosmic horror game inspired by the works of H.P. Lovecraft. This modern reimagining of the 1992 classic is a love letter to the original, capturing its eerie atmosphere and influential design elements that set the stage for future games like Silent Hill and Resident Evil. While the game is a remake, it brings fresh twists and a new narrative involving iconic characters from the original Alone in the Dark. The voice cast features well-known talent such as Jodie Comer, known for her roles in Free Guy and The Last Duel, and David Harbour from Hellboy and No Sudden Move. Their exceptional performance bring depth to the main protagonists, Emily and Edward. The game offers two campaigns, one for Edward and one for Emily, with subtle variations between them. While the overall narrative remains consistent, the gameplay experiences diverge slightly. As we delve into the story, keep in mind that there will be major spoilers ahead. The plot, while intriguing, may leave players pondering the mysteries and hidden depths of the game's world. I'll share an overview of Edward's campaign, followed by a closer look into the unexplained mysteries and possible theories surrounding the story. Proceed with caution if you wish to avoid spoilers. So there's Grace innocently crafting a paper mache mask, minding her own business. When she swoops in to check on Jeremy Hartwood, he asks if she's one of them, like he's auditioning for a role in a sci-fi flick. Next thing you know, he's rambling about letters and Mr. Wyatt like he's the feds. Grace, being the helpful soul she is, decides to play detective and jazz up the letter to Emily Hartwood to throw Mr. Wyatt off the scent. But hold up, the address is missing a number. Cue Grace's Sherlock Holmes moment, but when she turns around to consult Jeremy, he is pulled a disappearing act like a magician at a kid's party. Undeterred, Grace takes matters into her own hands and heads to Mr. Wyatt's office to post the letter. But plot twist, the manor suddenly turns into a scene straight out of a horror movie, complete with an eclipse and creatures that look like they've escaped from a bad dream. Now in panic, Grace pulls a move straight out of an action movie, using a stuffed bear as a makeshift bridge to escape the creepy critters hot on her trail. Finally finding sanctuary in the waiting room, she slams the door shut like she's starring in her own thriller. But just when you think the drama's over, Grace crawls through a window into Mr. Wyatt's office, thinking she's in the clear. Wrong move, cue the ominous noise in the dark, but does Grace heed the warning? Nope. As she leaves the letter on the table before she knows it, she's facing off against the giant creature straight out of a monster movie, leaving us all on the edge of our seats as the screen fades to black. Talk about cliffhangers. Alright, buckle up for this dramatic entrance. A crocodile casually snacks on its midday treat, setting the scene for an adventure you won't soon forget. But wait, here comes a car zooming by, driven by none other than the grounded yet curious private investigator Edward Canby, with his stunning companion Emily Hartwood in tow. As they exchange pleasantries, Edward gets down to business, asking Emily about her uncle Jeremy and what's got him in such a tizzy. Emily, with a nonchalant shrug, drops the bombshell, saying Jeremy's convinced he is possessed. Cue Edward's incredulous gasp, possessed? Like by the devil? Emily says he claims a dark man, following him and watching him at all times. Sounds like a Swiftie or a peeping Tom, but Emily, ever the skeptic, brushes it off as nonsense, though it does give her a bit of a chill, considering the family's track record. Edward's eyebrows shoot up in surprise. Possession track record? Sounds like something straight out of a horror movie. Emily clarifies that it's not possession per se, but rather a good old-fashioned case of the family curse. You know, the kind that drives everyone bonkers as they get older. Edward's eyes widen in disbelief, asking if her uncle didn't end up 6 feet under. Did he? As that why he's holed up in Derceto Manor, saying that for for us to understand that the land of Derceto Manor, a place so remote it's practically off the grid, that once you step foot in there, you might as well be waving goodbye to civilization. Anyway, Emily says that her uncle Jeremy is convinced he's got a ghostly hitchhiker in his brain, and instead of calling the Lawrence, he's banking on Dr. Gray's therapy session to exorcise the demons, because, you know, when you're in doubt, psychoanalysis it out. Now in waltzes our fearless detective, Edward, ready to uncover the truth. He's got one burning question though. What's the deal with that letter? Is it a secret love confession? A receipt for the family secret lasagna? Nope. Turns out Jeremy's cooked up a juicy conspiracy theory. He's convinced the staff and patients are in epic collaboration, plotting some kind of cult shenanigans. Edward asks if she does think that her uncle just cooking up stories in his noggin. Emily replies by it's all a concoction to avoid the truth. Edward asks, but what truth? Emily says the grim reality that he's a nobody, that he's not someone worth getting. Emily, nearing the Derceto Manor, tells Edward that she's fretting over her uncle's sanity and wonder if he's got a piece on him. Edward, surprised, saying, a gun? Yeah, but do you really think? Emily notes that probably not, but let's keep it close in case you need to wave it a bit. Arriving at locked manor doors, Emily wonders where's the welcoming committee. Why no one answering? Edward tells her to keep her cool and that he'll sneak in from behind. Going around the manor, Edward finds his way in and opens the front door to Emily. As Emily frets about Jeremy's disappearance, Edward attempts to ease the tension with Mrs. Thompson, while Emily kept asking where could Jeremy have scampered off to. Did he get mistaken for a unicorn and whisked away to Narnia? Edward telling Mrs. Thompson will just be hanging out in Jeremy's room. Hope that's cool with you. Mrs. Thompson reluctantly gives them directions to Jeremy's room, hinting at a potential showdown with Dr. Gray. Cut to Jeremy's room, where Edward excitedly discovers a crayon drawing of the talisman, telling Emily to check out this masterpiece. Think it's the key to unlocking Jeremy's secret lair? Emily nods. Last time she checked, they weren't in Hogwarts, but who knows, it's her first time seeing it. As Emily and Edward rummage through Jeremy's belongings, they stumble upon a painting that stops them dead in their tracks. Emily calls for Edward. Quick, come look at this. Edward rushes over only to find a painting of Jeremy that looked like it was painted by Picasso after a bad dream. Edward, whoa, that's Jeremy? He looks like he just saw a ghost. In the painting, Jeremy is clutching the talisman Edward just asked Emily about, with a book titled Reflections on the Power of Verbs in Certain Texts by Juan Luis Jorge. Emily, let's take this for evidence. As Emily grabs the painting, Edward suddenly feels entranced by it. Edward, dazed, unable to look away, but just as quickly the trance came, it was broken when Emily snatches the painting away. Edward shaking his head, confused on what just happened. Edward follows Emily out of the room, only to find her mysteriously vanish. Edward calling out for Emily. Panicked, Edward rushes back to Jeremy's room, throwing open the windows in a desperate attempt to figure out what's going on, only to find himself transported to a dark, foggy New Orleans. Edward, confused, asking how could this be happening. Undeterred, Edward bravely faces an unidentified creature and marches towards a store named Johnny the Conqueror, stocked with medical supplies and tools. Edward strolls into the store, where a mysterious figure warns him of an unwelcome guest. The stranger, locked up tight, tells Edward we've got some unexpected visitors and they're not here for tea. Edward, baffled, asks if this is his store. The stranger, later known as Baptiste, chuckles, telling him no. Both of them just lost souls in Jeremy's circus of chaos. Baptiste spills the beans about Jeremy's shady deal with the dark side, while Edward wonders if it's more than just a tall tale. Baptiste tells him, yep, he struck a bargain with the dark man. He warned us. He did. But we were too busy playing charades to listen. As Baptiste introduced himself, Baptiste hints at Jeremy's hide-and-seek game. Baptiste tells Edward he's guided by a mystical medallion. Edward tells him the talisman. Baptiste tells Edward that it's some kind of a charm he had from Mrs. Jackson. Edward tells Mrs. Jackson, the voodoo priestess. Navigating past more monsters than a monster mash, Edward finds himself in the voodoo priestess lair, recognizing it from Jeremy's writing. Spotting the talisman on the table, Edward wonders if it's the ticket to finding their elusive friend. As Edward saw the same talisman that Jeremy had in the painting, he wondered to himself, could this talisman lead him to Jeremy? After cracking cryptic clues of the talisman puzzle, a door swings open, transporting Edward straight into Dr. Gray's office, away from the mayhem. Dr. Gray, smooth as silk, offers Edward a drink and dodges questions about Jeremy's whereabouts. Edward persists, but Dr. Gray clamps up tighter than a jar of pickles, suggesting Edward interrogate the orderlies for clues. Bounding out, Edward bumps into the bewildered Emily, staring at Edward with wide eyes in disbelief, asking Edward how on earth did he just appear out of thin air, and where did he vanish to before? Edward scratched his head, equally perplexed, telling Emily he's just as confused as she is. One minute you're here, the next, poof, you're gone. Their minds raced with wild theories as they pondered the bizarre events unfolding around them. Emily shared her concerns about the evasive behavior of everyone she encountered, questioning if they were caught in some twisted sitcom plot. Edward leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper, asking Emily if she thinks there's something paranormal going on here. Emily shot him a look and told him to pull himself together. We cannot afford to lose our minds now. Besides, she got enough on her plate trying to figure out how to wrangle this chaos. Refusing to acknowledge the eerie disappearance and the sudden nightfall that enveloped the manor, Emily remained steadfast in her determination to unravel the mystery. Meanwhile, Edward couldn't shake the feeling that these strange occurrences were somehow connected to him. Was he the unwitting star of the supernatural sideshow? Emily turned to Edward, a glimmer of determination in her eyes. If he's coming with her to Dr. Gray's office. Edward hesitated. His nerves frayed, said he can't. There's something else he needed to do. Something important. With a sense of purpose, Edward retreated to Jeremy's book, flipping through its withered pages until he found a passage about a place called Terrella. It was time to dive deeper into the rabbit hole of mystery and mayhem. As Emily fretted over Edward's safety, she couldn't help but voice her concern, asking Edward if he's sure he's alright. Edward flashed her a confident grin, assuring Emily not to worry about him, and that he got this investigation, and told her to go talk to Dr. Gray and they'll rendezvous later. With a reassuring pat on the back, Edward set off on his own adventure, pondering the peculiar powers of the talisman that had just whisked him from the French Quarter to Dr. Gray's office. If Jeremy could do the same, he could be hiding anywhere, even in the pantry. Determined to crack the case, Edward pressed on, attempting to unlock the chained door. Suddenly, the world around him went topsy-turvy, with ravens soaring all around him and flaming windows and walls oozing with mysterious goo. Undeterred, Edward managed to find a bolt cutter and bravely snapped through the chains, restoring order to the chaotic room in the blink of an eye. Venturing into the kitchen to investigate strange noises, Edward found himself face to face with the frantic Mrs. Thompson, brandishing a knife and demanding to know why he was rummaging through her pantry. With a sheepish grin, Edward beat a hasty retreat, dodging flying utensils as Mrs. Thompson slammed the door in his face. Back in the manor, Edward stumbled upon McCarthy, frantically searching for Grace. Edward shook his head sympathetically that he hadn't seen her anywhere. Undeterred, Edward pressed on, stumbling upon Elizbitta Perosi's room and discovering a missing piece for the clock puzzle. As he exited the room, the manor shifted once again, with the hallway leading to the clock returning to its normal state. With a triumphant grin, Edward solved the clock puzzle, and the talisman revealed what appeared to be Jeremy's room, the next stop on his wild and wacky adventure. As Edward started into the ever-changing realm, the world around him decided to throw a curveball, transforming into a chaotic mix of darkness and disorder. Undeterred, he leaped into Jeremy's room, scratching his head in confusion. This feels like one of those wacky dreams where show up to work naked. Eyeing the surreal surroundings, suddenly struck with an epiphany, Edward realized he was knee-deep in one of Jeremy's memories, specifically the oil rig one he'd read about in Jeremy's book. Well, isn't this just peachy? Edward's deciding that the next logical step was to seek out the notorious Hateful Mound, dodging monstrous creatures and sidestepping floors that oozed like lava, quite the hazard for one's loafers. Edward found himself face to face with a creature colossal. It made Godzilla look like a gecko. Now that's what I call an oversized omelette. Not that much, but you know. Waiting to happen, Edward nervously tiptoed past the creature, finally reaching a cave-like hideout. Edward stumbled upon Jeremy's bag, only to be interrupted by Lottie, Baptiste's sister, who popped up like a jack-in-the-box. Well, isn't this a delightful surprise? Here you was expecting tea and crumpets, and I get a visit from Lottie, the cave crusader. After some quick reassurances that he wasn't the boogeyman in disguise, Edward and Lottie found themselves facing down a ferocious monster. Ah, just another day in the life of a monster magnet. Edward bravely leaping into action and narrowly avoiding becoming monster munchies, dusting himself off. Edward finally got his hands on Jeremy's bag, eager to dive into its contents. But before he could do anything, the monstrous creature decided it wanted a piece of Lottie action. But Edward, the so gentleman, shoots at the monster, saving Lottie's life, but risking Edward to fly out of the memory realm before dying from that monster attack. Undeterred and slightly bruised, Edward rummaged through the bag's contents, discovering a painting tool and the very book Jeremy's had clutched in the enigmatic painting. Well, isn't it so exciting? A paint equipment thingy and a book about the power of verbs. With a mischief glint in his eye, Edward flipped through the pages, stumbling upon a drawing of a constellation pointing towards Taurus, with a message scrawled beneath it: "The Great Library." A treasure hunt. Edward, strapping on his adventurer hat, setting off on the next leg of his hilariously wild journey, going into the library, not the Great Library. The world shifts again for another monster encounter, and after killing the monsters and leaving the room, the world shifts again to normal. Edward feels whatever force in this place it's always watching and trying to stop him in every corner. As Edward trudged forward, each twist and turn of his totally normal adventure gave him a sliver of hope that he was inching closer to the truth, or at least closer to get home for a pizza party. Descending into the cellar like a brave explorer on a quest for the world's creepiest treasure, Edward stumbled upon the boiler room, where he found what appeared to be Dr. Wyatt the clerk lying lifeless with eyes sprouting like mushrooms all over his body. Edward blinked twice, wondering if his eyes were playing tricks on him or if this was just another day in the life of a clueless sleuth. Venturing into Grace's room, Edward couldn't shake the feeling that she looked oddly familiar, like a character from a sitcom he binge-watched in a past life. Hello, déjà vu? Anyone? Scratching his head in confusion, but it was in Cassandra's room where things took a turn, for the cryptic Grace drawing something that resembled a Picasso masterpiece and spoken riddles that would make even the Sphinx scratch its head. "Do I know you from somewhere?" Edward asked. Grace tells him that she do remember him, but he don't, and that's okay. Edward, being the nice teddy bear he is, asks if McCarthy being nice to her, as Grace, leaving the room, tells him that not everyone's need to be saved. Back in the boiler room, Edward's brain cells went into overdrive as he tackled yet another riddle of the talisman. With a puff of smoke and a flourish of confetti, maybe just a quiet click, okay? The talisman revealed another room, begging Edward to dive headfirst into Jeremy's memory lane once more, finding himself in a cemetery straight out of a Tim Burton film. Edward chuckled nervously, calling Jeremy's scribblings about graveyards and eerie chapels just another day in the afterlife. Marching onward to his next destination in this nightmarish realm, armed with nothing but a witty remark and a talisman that seemed to have a sense of humor all in its own. As Edward tiptoed into the chapel, he was met with the sight of Perosi's surprisingly well-preserved body in the coffin, looking like she was ready for a red carpet event. Complete with a letter tucked between her crossed arms, he couldn't resist the urge to approach the gorgeous cold dead body, only to have Jeremy with all the politeness of a librarian shushing a noisy veteran, reminding him not to touch her. Edward, feeling like he stumbled into a daytime soap opera, explained that he was in derceto with his niece, searching for Jeremy. Jeremy, now sweating more than a marathon runner, wondered aloud why would she come, before remembering the letter he had gave Grace to send. Edward, demanding answers faster than a kid demanding candy, asked Jeremy how he was connected to this bizarre situation. Jeremy, looking like a deer caught in headlights, confessed to making a deal with someone shady. When Edward mentioned the dog man, Jeremy practically turned paler than Perosi's, pleading with him not to say the name out loud. As Edward pressed for more info, like a detective interrogating a suspect, Jeremy reluctantly spilled the beans about his pact, resigning himself to eternal imprisonment to keep the evil of derceto contained. Edward, determined to be the hero of this twisted tale, found Jeremy accepting his fate like a sad puppy with its tail between its legs. But Edward wasn't about to let a little thing, like a supernatural pact, ruin his day. When he mentioned wanting to go to Terrella, Jeremy sounded the alarm about the forces keeping him locked up. But Edward was as stubborn as a mule with a stubbornness complex. As Jeremy panicked and warned Edward about the dark presence looming behind him, Edward found himself rudely awakened in Perosi's room, clutching the letter from Jeremy. It seemed the adventure was far from over, and Edward was ready to tackle it with the determination of a cat chasing a laser pointer. Reading the letter resting on Elizbitta Perosi's body, Edward discovered it was from Jeremy, who wrote with the curiosity of a cat on a keyboard, wondering how she managed to find her way back to him. He speculated that maybe her superpowered intellect led her back to this peculiar situation, and with the help of his trusty talisman, she might unlock the secrets of Terrella, the place Jeremy desperately wanted to go. The letter hinted at a possibility, as thrilling as one of my videos. Perhaps they could reunite even beyond the grave for one last supernatural rodeo. Edward's detective brain deduced that Jeremy must have been ghost-blocked from Terrella by some cosmic bouncer, so he hoped Perosi's would swoop in, torch Jeremy's cursed library, and start anew. But Perosi's had her own skeletons in the closet, and her sudden demise through Edward's grand plan, of course, faster than a paper pot in a hurricane. Still, Edward was determined to unlock the secrets of Terrella and understand Jeremy's obsession with the place, as he grabbed his trusty telescope and solved the riddle of the talisman, only to be zapped into yet another memory. Is this Terrella? He wondered as he stumbled through a mysterious door. There he found a man lounging under a tree, sporting the chillest demeanor since the Big Bang. The man introduced himself as Juan Luis Jorge, the writer of a book Jeremy once deemed his life manual. Edward, now more baffled than a cat in a dog park, asked where he was and how he got there. Was this a memory, or did this place really exist? Juan calmly explained he was a product of Jeremy's subconscious, like Terrella, a place Jeremy never visited in reality, but one where his mind went for a spa day. Edward, trying to fit the puzzle pieces together like a toddler with a 1,000-piece jigsaw, asked if Juan was his guide. Juan shrugged. I'm here because Jeremy imagined me. I'm just a figment, not a fingerprint. But he promised to help if he could. Edward, ever the curious cat, asked how Jeremy's mental hideaway worked and why Jeremy wasn't already present in his own brainy paradise. Juan explained that during Dr. Gray's therapy sessions, Jeremy crafted Terrella in his mind to find tranquility and the ultimate zen. It's his mental all-inclusive resort, no umbrella drinks, but it got peace and quiet. Juan notes that although despite Jeremy's psyche pathways being open from derceto to Jeremy's mind, still Jeremy's subconscious was playing hard to get. For Jeremy to be in Terrella physically, it was just a wishful thinking. Edward asked Juan what he could do in this mindscape. Juan suggested exploring Jeremy's library to uncover the relationship between Jeremy and the Dark Man, and to think of it as a reunion episode of the Jerry Springer Show. Juan notes that Jeremy represses a lot of his memories of the Dark Man, so prepare for the unexpected. Edward, ever the inquisitive sleuth, wondered if he could learn how to undo the pact. Juan shrugged, telling Edward, "My friend, if I had that knowledge I'd be selling it for a mint." He warned Edward that the Dark Man was lurking in the library though, likely binge-reading every evil text he could find. Worried, Edward asked how to avoid the Dark Man. Juan suggested suppression and not paying him any attention, like trying to ignore a persistent telemarketer. Edward bravely ventured into the library, trying to solve riddles while being chased by the Dark Man. After an intense game of supernatural peekaboo, he found an elevator with a mysterious book. As he read a bit from it, the Dark Man snatched it away, leaving Edward with a sudden urge to quit the game entirely. But then, like an uninvited party guest, Juan popped up behind the Dark Man, making odd noises and distracting him enough to lead him out of the elevator. Juan swiftly closed the elevator door and hoped Edward found what he was looking for. Edward woke up from the memory, feeling he just got off a wild amusement park ride. He spotted Ruth sitting outside the elevator with a drink in hand. Ruth casually chatted with Edward about his investigation and made strange hand gestures. Edward, puzzled, asked about the mysterious sign. Ruth nonchalantly replied it was a submission gesture to the Dark Man. Shocked, Edward asked Ruth about the Brexit shipping company, the only clue got from the book before the Dark Man interrupting him. To his surprise, Ruth said yes, she do know it, and promptly transported him to another realm. It's like next day delivery but scarier. She said, "There you are, Eddie." He found himself at the waterfront office of the company. Edward stood there scratching his head as she sashayed away, leaving him more confused than someone reading only the last chapter of a book. Still, he had a mission. Edward, going inside the building, found out he had to find the infamous Gallatin Street in New Orleans, where Jeremy first encountered the Dark Man. Edward was wondering that place didn't exist anymore. Can he even find the right building? Such shock made him think maybe this world isn't just another place, maybe it's in another time as well. When he finally reached the address, Jeremy was there. Edward, no stranger to the bizarre at this point, got straight to the point and demanded Jeremy to explain what was happening. Jeremy rambled about Nyarlathotep, the Black Pharaoh, who seemed to be a 1,000-year-old magician with a closet full of Halloween masks. Edward asked how to break the pact between Jeremy and the Dark Man, but Jeremy kept sidestepping the question like a politician during a scandal. Jeremy tells Edward he did offer him a way out, a steps to take. Edward impatiently asks Jeremy what are they, but Jeremy tells him it's a fool errand. It's forever entombed in his dark desert temple. Growing impatient, Edward grabbed Jeremy and demanded the location of the Dark Man's temple. Jeremy, proving to be a slippery eel, escaped Edward's grip and bolted from the building. Edward, now closer to the truth, set his sight on finding the temple to end the horror show once and for all. Following the clues, Edward unlocked the mysteries of the sarcophagus, which opened to reveal a passage to a dark, foreboding cave. He ventured in, determined to solve the riddles and face whatever came his way. After navigating through the dark and winding passages, Edward found himself in a vast desert under an eerie eclipsed sun. He stumbled upon an abandoned camp and discovered a notebook with an ancient legends about the temple. He sought. He finds a notebook tells the ancient legends of the temple. It goes on talking about the temple of Nephran-ka, then goes on saying after much effort to destroy the unholy place, the temple didn't go in ruin, but rather sunk deep into the sand, and the pharaoh is long have been dead. The temple is thought to be lightless, built to harbor all the hunters of the dark. in our universe. According to Kitab al-Azif, also known as Necronomicon, it's the home for the unbearable chaos, named Nyarlathotep. Through ancient mechanism, it was said that the priests opened shafts channeling the light emitted through the strange stone called the Shining Trapzohedron. Several streams pulled together about the statue of the Dark Man and would be then sent through space into the Dark Sun, a message to the gods. The gifts bestowed to the sender is completely undocumented, but often assumed to involve dark plot pact, where souls are traded for malicious miracles. Edward, now an interred archaeologist, squeezed through a hole in the sand to enter the sunken temple, feeling like he was diving deep into the pages of a supernatural Indiana Jones script. Edward found himself in a dark, gloomy place where the creepy crawlies loved nothing more than spooking people and generally being bad news. He took out his flashlight, determined to banish the darkness with some good old-fashioned high-powered LED lighting, but even the powerful beam of light couldn't stop the screeching creatures from lurking around every corner. After a few epic monster-bashing battles, complete with Edward takedowns of the overgrown dust bunnies, he was able to solve enough puzzles to unlock a mysterious hole in the ground. Curiosity led him straight to a strange-looking dagger, but not your average paper cutter. Along with the dagger came some cryptic papers. He read them aloud. Acknowledge of psychological trauma, break through the barriers of self-deceit, and temperamental behavior. Edward's eyes went wide, because that contract exactly what he needed. No sooner had he finished reading the Darkman's terms than a swarm of bats swooped down from the rafters and carried him up into the night sky. Really unfortunate, I bet. He was just getting comfortable. Edward screaming like a little as he hung on for dear life. Before he knew it, Edward woke up in the attic, dazed and confused and staring right at Emily. After the obligatory awkward greeting, Edward couldn't shake the feeling that something big was brewing, so he quickly scanned the document contract once more. His face turned grim as he read about Jeremy's desperation. He'd given up on a medical cure and was now pinning all his hopes on the sacrificial dagger. If used, it might save him from Jacob, but it would also spell doom for derceto. Rubbing his temples, it's like choosing between a rock and a hard place with a side of a cursed doom. With no better options, Jeremy had accepted the dark man's terms. Edward knew he had his work cut out for him. Edward's head was buzzing with a mix of questions, mysteries, and a tiny bit of panic. Like, why on earth did Jeremy think accepting the dark man's terms was the only option he wanted? Did he miss the memo about not making deals with the devil? He couldn't help but feel like Dr. Gray and his team were somehow involved behind all the weirdness going down in Derceto. Determined to get to the bottom of things, Edward made his way to Dr. Gray's office, channeling his inner detective. He found the office empty, which gave him a chance to snoop around. Among the piles of medical reports, he found a note about Jeremy's treatment. Apparently, the good doctor had taken x-rays of Jeremy's brain and found something strange. Of course, this place couldn't resist the urge for a day in Derceto without a dose of bizarreness. With his curiosity fully ignited, Edward went off in search of Jeremy's x-rays. As he made his way to Jeremy's room, he stumbled upon a heartfelt note from Jeremy. It expressed regret that Jeremy's niece had dragged Edward into this mess, and it confessed that he had imprisoned the dark man in the attic. That sounds like a perfectly reasonable place to keep a dark man, to be honest. Jeremy pleaded with Edward to get Emily out of Derceto and away from the cursed evil, even if it meant bending the truth a bit. While I've never been opposed to a little creative storytelling, so into the preparations for the tall tales ahead. Venturing deeper into the manor, Edward encountered McCarthy and Grace. Grace was busy crafting a mask in her room, but she quickly left with McCarthy hot on her heels. Edward couldn't shake the feeling that Grace seemed oddly familiar. Do I know her from somewhere, he wondered. It was like a fog lifted from his memory. leaving him with a sense of a déjà vu. As he entered the empty room, Edward's heart raced as he noticed something eerily familiar. The view, the combination for the safe, and the torn wall with writing on it, it all came rushing back to him. Wait a minute, I did this. Edward talking to himself, that he had been there before. Looks like my past self has been busy, leaving breadcrumbs for me to follow. Edward approached the safe with all the finesse of a raccoon trying to pick a lock. He opened it eagerly, expecting a stash of treasure or maybe a well-preserved sandwich. Instead, he found a note from McCarthy. Yep, more cryptic messages. That's super fun. The note said if he wanted to find Jeremy, he needed to find Grace, the little girl, who was more connected to the whole mess than anyone realized. Edward racked his brain, but it felt like his memory was stuck in a loop. How long have I been in derceto? Scratching his head, so he went to Grace's room and solved the puzzle she had crafted with her drawings. The talisman opened another mysterious gate. To Edward's surprise, he was transported to his very own office in New Orleans, just as he had left it. This couldn't be Jeremy's memory. He's never been to Edward's office, ever before. Realization struck him like a rubber chicken to the face. Somehow the dark man had crept into his mind to mess with his thoughts. As he explored his office, he noticed a shadow of himself mobbing around, laminating over a case he was working on. Great. Poor Eddie, even his own shadow is having an existential crisis. After a long game of cat and mouse, Edward discovered the case was about a kidnapping. A father had taken his daughter without the mother's knowledge, and Edward had been on the case. The chase led him to the Beryl River Bridge, where he recalled the tragic end, a car chase gone wrong, the vehicle plunging into the river, and the father losing his life. Edward had saved Grace from the water, and he brought her back to New Orleans. Edward feeling the weight of his past choices crashing down on him. As Edward walked deeper into his memories, it dawned on him. The kidnapped child was Grace. No wonder she seemed so familiar. Edward had been chasing his own past this whole time. Just another day in the life of Edward, I suppose. Edward realized he needed to apologize to Grace for not knowing her mother wouldn't want her around. Edward notes that he's sorry about it, and that his detective skills might be great for finding clues, but not so much for knowing family dynamics. He admitted feeling a pang of guilt. Grace then dropped the bombshell, saying her dad is still in the car at the bottom of the lake, and telling him, by the way, I'm there too, drowning to our deaths. Edward blinked. Well, this just got darker than my high school poetry phase, he muttered. Edward asked if there was a way to save them both. Grace's response was less than reassuring. Maybe the dark man just wants to see you suffer, she said casually, like it was no big deal. Fantastic. More suffering on the menu, Edward thought. Finding a boat, Edward set off toward the sunken car. He opened the door, peering inside only to be greeted by Grace's father's decomposed body, plunging him into the depths of the river. Moments later, he found himself waking up in the bathroom, drenched and disoriented. Emily, who was nearby, informed Edward that he was planning to investigate Dr. Gray's room. Well, that's one way to spend an afternoon. Still trying to shake off the eerie experience, Edward set off on his own adventure, solving yet another talisman riddle, and before he knew it, another gate opened. He dived into it and found himself in Jeremy's hideout, just like the note had said. But Jeremy's cry for help interrupted Edward's greetings. Jeremy was stuck in a mud pool and needed rescuing. As Edward rushed to help, he stumbled and fell into a pit, witnessing Jeremy and Dr. Gray deep in conversation. To Edward's surprise, Jeremy seemed panicked, proclaiming he'd given up and all was lost. Dr. Gray, on the other hand, calmly reminded Jeremy to focus on his happy place. Edward shouted at them both, but neither seemed to see or hear him. It's like he's the invisible man now. Edward yelled, trying to make his presence known. Finally, Dr. Gray responded, asking Edward if he was okay. Shocked and confused, Edward asked if Dr. Gray had just been talking to Jeremy. I haven't seen Jeremy all day, Dr. Gray replied nonchalantly. Edward was left baffled and feeling like he'd missed a memo. Edward feeling like he must be out of his mind. Dr. Gray asked if Edward was alright, but Edward made a quick exit, determined to find Jeremy and figure out what on earth was going on. This place is like a game of hide and seek, with a dash of insanity. Edward stood there in Dr. Gray's room, his mind racing as he tried to comprehend the absurdity of the situation. As he picked up a book and placed it back on the shelf, a secret door creaked open behind him. I know, very convenient, but why not? Emily, clearly on board with the new development, raised an eyebrow at him and straight to the secret, creepy hidden room. As if this was just another Tuesday morning adventure, they stepped into the secret room, which was filled with bizarre books and a talisman drawing in the middle of the room. Emily turned to Edward and said, "You know, I've been thinking about this whole derceto situation, and it sounds like Dr. Gray is dealing with a mass delusion. It must be all that funky energy in the air." Edward gave her a skeptical look. "Funky energy, Emily? Are we talking about the same place here? Because this place feels more like a horror movie set." Emily tells Edward, "You know, derceto has a history of creating cults devoted to some strange nature goddess. The name itself is rooted in ancient fertility myths called Shub-Niggurath, but Dr. Gray and his cronies seems to be more into naming it the Black God of the Woods with 1,000 young. Talk about a mouthful." Edward stared at her blankly. "Did you just make that up, or is this really happening?" Before Emily could respond, the phone in the room started ringing, startling Edward. Edward picked it up hastily, half expecting to hear someone speaking in a creepy voice. To his relief, it was just a regular creepy voice. The unknown man on the other end spoke cryptically about Jeremy being with the dark man and that Edward would leave immediately. Edward hung up the phone, his mind racing. "Well, that was weird," he said, looking at Emily. Edward was convinced he walked into the Twilight Zone or maybe a Monty Python sketch, solving another talisman riddle, and now he was trying to piece together what on earth was happening. He turned back to the room where Emily asked him if he was okay. He tried to play it cool, saying it was just a stupid phone. Emily responds, "Yeah, it's dead. I tried it earlier." Only made Edward's confusion worse. He stared at the phone as though it were the devil incarnate. "Am I seeing things? Did that phone really ring?" he wondered, feeling the creeping touch of insanity. He shifted his focus to the closet where he could see a gate open through the talisman. He called for Emily, hoping she would confirm his sighting, but she just gave him a perplexed look. "You seeing things now, Edward?" she asked, her expression suggesting she might want to check his temperature. His frustration grew as he wondered whether he was losing his marbles or if he had acquired a gift for spotting invisible portals since his arrival to derceto. Determined to prove his sanity, he charged into the closet on his own, leaving Emily behind. Inside the gate, he found himself in a vast snowy land, and he felt like he had walked straight into Narnia. Sequel no one had signed up for. He trudged through the snow up the mountain only to encounter the man from the phone, Jacob Van Ostaded. Jacob charged at Edward, trying to take him out. Edward dodged Jacob's sloppy attacks, barely keeping his balance in the slippery snow. Edward improvised with some clumsy swings and a few well-aimed snowballs. He managed to defeat Jacob, leaving him rolling around in the snow like a confused toddler. Feeling victorious, Edward puffed out his chest, ready to continue his journey. But then, to his horror, Jacob sprang back to life, looking more mutated than before. Edward rolled his eyes as he squared up for another round. The two engaged in intense battle, with Edward narrowly dodging Jacob's monstrous attack. At one point, Edward even used a nearby snowman as a shield, causing Jacob to burst out laughing. Finally, Edward stabbed the sacrificial dagger deep into Jacob's eye, sending him flailing back like a faulty inflatable tube man. But Jacob grabbed Edward, and they both tumbled through the strange land, experiencing a dizzying series of places Edward had been to before, in Jeremy's memory lane. Edward landed with a thud, his head spinning like he'd just stepped off a particularly wild merry-go-round. All of a sudden, the dark man appears, surrounding Edward. Edward, feeling hopeless, asking what more does he want. He did everything in the contract. Does he want him to lose his mind too? Angered and frustrated, Edward pulls his gun and starts smashing the dark man's head, only to hear Lottie and Baptiste hurrying to stop Edward and sedated him. He woke up groggy, wondering if he had missed the chance to audition for a role live with the script of a dark thriller. What happened? Edward asked as he squinted his eyes to focus on the person skipping ahead of him. Oh, you were having a little moment, Baptiste informed him, wearing a calm, almost bored expression, as if this kind of thing happened too every Tuesday. Grace had to sprinkle you with the fairy dust and perform an interruptive dance to get you back to your senses. Grace nodded, twirling gracefully, as to emphasize Baptiste's point. You were convinced the dark man was back and out for your soul. Turns out it was just Dr. Gray in a new hoodie. He was trying to show you his new fashion. Rubbing his temples, Dr. Gray and Jeremy were sitting beside him, looking like they'd just gotten off a wild roller coaster. Edward asked Jeremy, "You good, buddy? Hope I didn't mess you up too much." Edward asked, trying to hide his concern. Dr. Gray's response was anything but reassuring, to be honest. "Oh, don't worry about Jeremy. You just performed a quick lobotomy on him. He's a little quieter, and his favorite word now is potato for some reason." Edward blinked. Things escalated quickly, even by his standards. Was any of this real? Or was it just another one of these off-the-wall dreams? Does Emily know about Jeremy's new, quietness? Edward asked, trying to find a solid ground amidst the chaos. Dr. Gray nodded solemnly. Yes, she took it quite well. Since she's been practicing her everything is fine smile for just such an occasion. Just as Edward was about to suggest a group therapy session, Mrs. Thompson appeared out of nowhere, insisting that Dr. Gray to hurry up and start some ritual involving the new words that Jeremy forcibly had apparently taught them. Before Edward could ask for clarification, everyone began chanting a prayer that sounded like a mix between a sea shanty and an IKEA instruction manual. Grace then put a noose around her neck, which made Edward's jaw drop. Meanwhile, McCarthy began pulling the rope, hoisting Grace above a creepy tree. Edward's internal alarm bells went off at the same time as Emily, who appeared on the balcony, shot Baptiste in the leg, causing him to release Edward. Edward immediately turned to McCarthy, taking a quick shot at him, which made him drop the rope and allowed Grace to fall safely to the ground. But things didn't stop there. Chaos erupted as the tree, also known as the Black God of the Woods, appeared with arms and tentacles, turning the gathering into a nightmarish bloodbath, eating all the staff and patients alike. Despite the pandemonium, Edward knew he had to stop the demonic creature after what felt like an endless battle that could only be described as an intense workout and therapy session combined. Edward finally emerged victorious. Later, Edward, Emily, Jeremy, and Grace stood in front of the burning manor, looking as if they'd just been through a haunted house experience. Jeremy seemed baffled, saying I should have been dead. This isn't how the story goes. The group shrugged as one might after barely surviving an apocalypse. That's it, boys. With that, the four survivors left the manor, their story reaching its absurdly dramatic conclusion. One of the more perplexing aspects of the game revolves around Jeremy's mind and memories, and how these elements intertwine with the story. Throughout the game, you navigate environments that are manifestations of Jeremy's memories, ranging from the old rig and the hateful mound to the graveyard and the docks. These settings are products of Jeremy's mind, influenced and brought to life through the enigmatic Darkman. The Talisman of the Black Stone plays a crucial role in this journey, allowing you to access and traverse Jeremy's thoughts and manifestations. The talisman which Jeremy receives from Mrs. Jackson suggests the involvement of dark magic or voodoo. As the game progresses, Dr. Gray reveals that Jeremy has spoken about the Dark Man in interviews and created guardians in his mind to provide sanctuary, such as a safe haven named Jeriola, and characters like his favorite author and Jacob Van Ostad. Jeriola, a fictional realm, introduced you to Jeremy's beloved author, Juan Luis Jorge, who wrote reflections on the power of the verb in certain texts. This book explores themes of destiny and the divine power of free will, advocating for transcending the fear of choice to overcome the curse of fate and write one's own story. By the game's end, we realize that Jeremy believed he was fated to die. Jorge's philosophy offered Jeremy solace, embedding itself deep in his subconscious and providing a safe haven within the great library featured in Jorge's book. Jacob van Ostad, one of Jeremy's admired explorers, serves as a protective figure in Jeremy's imagination. This personification acts as a shield against Jeremy's mental struggles. However, Jacob's role as a guardian takes a darker turn when he loses control, somehow causing Jeremy to experience mania. Jacob's intentions to keep Jeremy in a state of mania for self-preservation and validation ultimately exacerbate Jeremy's condition. Nephran-ka was the last pharaoh of the third dynasty of Egypt. For reasons unknown, he attracted the interest of the cosmic being Nyarlathotep. Nyarlathotep was spawned from Azathoth himself, as one of the very first beings in all of existence, according to the Cthulhu mythos. He serves Azathoth as his messenger and as the soul of the outer gods, though Nyarlathotep usually interferes with mortal affairs at will for his own amusement and to further his own individual goals. And he is unquestionably the cruelest and vilest entity in the entire mythos. And I just want to throw this info out there. You can do with it whatever you might like. Canonically, Nyarlathotep is the uncle of Shub-Niggurath. That's neat, isn't it? Anyway, back to Nephran-ka. Nyarlathotep offered Nephran-ka a deal. If he sacrificed enough people in his name, he would be granted the gift of prophecy. Nephran-ka sacrificed thousands and thousands of victims to Nyarlathotep and completely outlawed any religion other than Nyarlathotep worship. It is also possible that he may have founded the Brotherhood of the Black Pharaoh. These sacrifices eventually brought revolution to the country and the pharaoh was overturned. The next pharaoh immediately drove out all the priests of Nyarlathotep and demolished all his temples, before amending the Book of the Dead to remove all mentions of Nephran-ka. Nephran-ka fled to what is now the city of Cairo, planning for him and his followers to flee to Britain. His enemies heard of the plot and surrounded him, forcing him to flee underground to a tomb he constructed. There he caused himself and his followers to be buried alive, along with all his secrets trapped in the tomb. Nephran-ka summoned Nyarlathotep one last time by sacrificing the remaining of his followers. Nyarlathotep granted him the gift of prophecy, and he inscribed upon the walls the secrets of the future. Upon his seeming death, though in fact he survived and simply went into an eternal sleep, Nyarlathotep created one of his avatars in the pharaoh's image. Nephran-ka's tomb is guarded by the Brotherhood of the Beast, who often lure unsuspecting Westerners into the tomb and kill them to fulfill his prophecies. Nephran-ka himself is also capable of awakening from his eternal sleep and taking the form of who intruded into his tomb in order to kill them. Which brings us to one of the mysteries of the Hotwood family curse and how it started. The Darkman came to the United States via Brexit Shipping Company, who carried the Egyptian sarcophagus that contained the body of Nephran-ka, Nyarlathotep's mortal form, inside one of their ships for currently unrevealed reasons. At some point of time after arriving on the United States, he attached to the unwilling Jeremy Hotwood in Mississippi in order to unleash darkness and chaos upon the world, causing Jeremy's father's death. Jeremy became paranoid as a result, and that was the beginning of the Hartwood family curse. Once Jeremy became aware of the cult's plans at derceto, particularly their intention to sacrifice a child and unleash the malevolence of Shub-Niggurath upon the world, he felt compelled to intervene to prevent this catastrophic outcome. Jeremy made a pact with the Dark Man in exchange for liking the unleashed evil within the confines of derceto. Jeremy promised the Dark Man everything, sealing the fate of the staff and patients on the estate. Recognizing the peril for Emily, Jeremy entrusted Edward with the task of removing her from their settle to hinder the cult's progress. Jeremy sabotaged the boiler room and hid the talisman clock plates to restrict access to his sanctuary. He collaborated with Elizbitta Perosi, a fellow patient at Derceto, who secured the clock plates in a locked drawer and vowed to confront the Black God's darkness, leaving Jeremy hoping she would go to Tariela, Gret's library, and burn it down, allowing him a fresh start together. Elizabeth's sudden and unexplained death cut short her mission, leaving Jeremy distraught and surrendered to his fate. The terms of Jeremy's pact with the Dark Man centered on acknowledging psychological trauma and shattering the barrier of self-deceit. These conditions were cunningly chosen by the Dark Man, knowing Jeremy's fragile mental state would prevent him from fulfilling them. Edward's intervention on the steampot proved crucial, as he shattered Jeremy's barrier of self-deceit, breaking the first term of the contract. Edward confronted his own trauma on the bridge, demonstrating the capacity to manage Jeremy's temper and manic behavior, which completed the second term. Ultimately, Edward stabbing Jacob in the eye with a sacrificial dagger effectively lobotomized Jeremy, which stopped Jacob from keeping the self-sabotaging behavior into Jeremy's psyche. With the pact between Nyarlathotep and Jeremy's nullified, the protection against the cultists and the evils of the Shub-Niggurath was lost. The fate of derceto and the world now hangs in the balance. In the annals of history, before the Grand Estate was known as derceto, the land was sold for mere $30 to a mysterious man named Elijah Beckford in 1880. Beckford enlisted hundreds of workers from New Orleans to clear the dense forest and construct what would become a majestic mansion. However, this wasn't just any plantation, it was a site of a chilling events that stretched far beyond the protection of parakeet, tobacco, and indigo. Beckford's true sinister intentions for building the estate were to establish a temple for his secret cult, which thrived and swelled to over 100 followers. As the cult's influence spread, townspeople began reporting eerie scenes of naked revelers under the moonlight, wailing and chanting in what seemed to be dark, demonic rituals. The gruesome reign came to an abrupt end in 1862, when Union soldiers, led by Captain G.W. Norton, marched into the estate, intent on freeing the enslaved workers and putting an end to Beckford's nefarious practices. They set the plantation ablaze. Beckford's slaves fought with ferocity, defending the estate until their last breath. Amidst the chaos and the gunfire, Beckford met his end, killed by a Union bullet. Derceto, once a grand estate, fell into despair and ruin over the years, its ownership a subject of lengthy dispute until it was returned to the Lado family in 1901. Throughout this time, the land was plagued by encampments of squatters, prompting multiple police interventions to remove them. Despite numerous attempts to clear the trespassers, they persisted, driven by darker motives. The squatters were eventually revealed to be members of a new cult known as the Cult of Shub-Niggurath. In 1907, Inspector Legrasse of the police force was tasked with rescuing a group of kidnapped children held captive by the cultists. The rescue operation culminated in a violent confrontation, resulting in numerous arrests and fatalities among the cult members. The cult proved to be a tenacious and dangerous adversary, yet their greatest downfall ultimately came from within. When Captain J.W. Norton was dispatched to eliminate the cult, he encountered members who fought with reckless abandon, seemingly eager to meet their end. Their desperate attacks and willingness to die resembled a mass suicide, marking the tragic and unsettling conclusion of the cult's presence in derceto, or at least that what was thought. In 1908, the Lido family reconstructed derceto and added a grand conservatory around an ancient tree. The following year, derceto transformed into an artist colony managed by Captain Sebastian Cortez, with 3 artists renting the space. This community, known as the Astrate colony, was named after the ancient Phoenician goddess, revered across the Mediterranean for her association with fertility, sexuality, love, and war. This goddess is considered an early incarnation of the Greek deity Aphrodite. The inspiration for the name and imagery of the goddess may have been influenced by the artist's encounters with a sense of madness. Intriguingly, the name derceto also refers to another deity named Atargatis, the chief goddess of northern Syria in classical antiquity, known for her roles in fertility and as the protector of her city and people. Atargatis was worshipped primarily in Hierapolis, northeast of Aleppo, Syria. The artists in the commune employed astrological ciphers as their signature. However, in 1915, the colony of 12 artists vanished without a trace, possibly due to a hurricane. Yet, considering what we know now, their disappearance may have resulted from a failed ritual, just like the end of the game. As we delve deeper into the history of derceto, a disturbing pattern emerges. The land on which derceto stands seems tainted by a dark force that induces madness in those who linger nearby. This malevolent presence has fostered the rise of dangerous cults within derceto, presenting as significant challenges and dangers. The longer one stays in the area, the more they fall under the influence of a sinister entity known as the Black God of the Woods. Emily herself observes that the land exerts a disorienting effect on people, leading to widespread paranoia and delusions. This in turn has resulted in the formation of cults worshipping a fertility goddess. A note discovered in the manor describes individuals pleading and wailing in homage to the Black God of the Woods, providing further evidence of the pervasive influence corrupting the estate. Another indication of this dark influence is the rot overtaking the manor, which is known to induce madness in those it touches. Yet found throughout the game confirms this connection, revealing that the rot is a source of madness. Moreover, the game presents evidence of cult activities and a belief in dark magic, such as when Mrs. Thompson is found singing in Crayola and burying a mummified cat, a voodoo practice mentioned in the family Bible to bring good luck or inflict bad omen. Ultimately, the source of this corruption appears to be linked to the large tree on the estate. As we soon discovers, this is no ordinary tree. It may be either the true entity known as Shub-Niggurath or one of its avatars known as the Dark Young. Shub-Niggurath is an outer god in the pantheon, is a dark and twisted deity associated again with fertility. Her monstrous progeny, known as the Dark Young of Shub-Niggurath, are terrifying creatures that stand as tall as trees, ranging from 12 to 20 feet in height. These abominations have short stump-like legs and a mass of tentacles where a head would normally be. Buckwheat moss are strewn across their trunks, giving them an unsettling, tree-like appearance. They emit a foul odor, reminiscent of an open grave, and inhabit woodlands where Shupnigroth's cult is active. The dark young are often summoned to preside over cult ceremonies, a process detailed in the Book of Eban that involves a blood offering. The ritual must take place deep in the woods during the darkest phase of the moon, and the sacrifice must be made over an altar. These creatures act as proxies for Shub-Niggurath, accepting sacrifices and aiding in the worship of the cultists, and furthering their mother's influence. Across the world, this connection suggests that the large tree in derceto is not Shub-Niggurath herself, but one of her 1,000 young serving as a proxy for the local cultists. Regarding the cultist ceremonies and their discussions on using different words, it's evident that they experimented with various prayers without success. This led Jeremy to provide them, of course, forcibly with new phrases, possibly to make the ritual seem more Christian-like or to appease Shub-Niggurath in some manner. The cultists persist in their rituals, seeking to transform their human sacrifice into their god without horn, a symbolic figure that may spare them from harm and enable them to continue spreading the well of Shub-Niggurath. Elizbitta Perosi is one of the most enigmatic characters in the game. Her backstory is shrouded in mystery, beginning with her unexpected appearance at derceto. Found wandering the grand parlor, she exhibited confusion and partial amnesia, yet insisted she belonged at derceto and offered to pay for her stay. Elizbitta initially claimed to have been a part of the Astrate artist colony 2 decades earlier, given her apparent age in her 30s. Her claim seems improbable, suggesting an anomaly in her perception of time. She later retracted her story, distancing herself from the colony and asserting she was not the same Elizabetta Perosi who had been associated with it. Further investigations revealed that the woman named Elizabetta Perosi was indeed part of the Astrate artist colony in her 30s during its time. This revelation supports the theory that Elizabetta is the same person, now dissociating herself from her previous identity due to her rejection of Jobnigrath. The Astrate artist colony was known to have been a front for a cult devoted to the dark entity, and Elizabeth's shift in stance likely signifies her break from the cult. One of her notes contains a vow to destroy the Black God of the Woods, also known as Shub-Niggurath. This shift aligns with her desire to sever ties with the darkness of her past and could explain her refusal to acknowledge her previous identity. Elizabeth's ability to navigate time and space suggests a connection to the talisman of the Black Stone. Jeremy's belief in her ability to destroy the Great Library and reunite with him beyond death implies that she may have wielded the talisman for 20 years, either lost in another realm or transported to the future in an instant. The talisman is known to transport its bearer across different places and times, so either scenario seems plausible. Elizabeth's potential association with the Dark Man might have facilitated her escape from derceto and her peaceful demise. She may have aligned herself with the Dark Man, sacrificing herself, as Jeremy intended, or could have been silenced by the staff upon the discovery of her intentions. Ultimately, Elizabetta Perosi's story raises questions about her true nature and allegiance, leaving much to interpretation and further speculation. Let me know what you think. And last but not least, we have Ruth Tallant. In the game, one of the most intriguing encounters involves Ruth Tallant, a patient Edward meets during his journey. Ruth's role and actions throughout the game leave a lasting impression, particularly as she guides Edward to pivotal locations and demonstrates an ability to navigate between worlds. One of the game's endings, involving Emily's submission to the Dark Man, deepens the mystery surrounding Ruth. In this ending, Emily adopts a gesture, once performed by Ruth, and upon being transported, Emily finds Ruth and Grace in the Dark Man's temple, both wearing masks and surrounded by his priests. This revelation suggests that Ruth was not only one of the most astute guests at derceto, but also adept at aligning herself with multiple deities to ensure her survival. While most staff and patients were entirely devoted to Shub-Niggurath, Ruth chose a more strategic approach by following both Shub-Niggurath and the Dark Man. Ruth's intelligence becomes apparent when she learns about Jeremy's pact with the Dark Man and the potential consequences for those trapped within derceto. Realizing the importance of the Dark Man's role in Jeremy's plan, Ruth begins gathering information and eventually submits herself to him. Ruth's assistance to Edward, providing directions and crucial information for his investigation, hints at her deeper connection to the Dark Man. In the secret ending, her presence alongside Grace and the Dark Man's priests reinforce the theory that Ruth worshipped both deities, balancing her allegiance to maximize her chances of survival.